Hello and welcome to another episode of the Zelda Blind Review series, where I play all of the Zelda games in order of release for the first time, and then give my thoughts and opinions on them. In the last two videos I talked about Zelda 1, a game that I enjoyed a lot, and Zelda 2, a game that I enjoyed, well, not as much. The public at the time enjoyed both of these games, with both entries selling over 10 million copies during their lifetimes. In 1988, Nintendo began working on the new title for the NES, but a year later they decided to bring the game to their new console in the works, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which would be released in November of 1990. Due to the success of the first two entries in the series, Nintendo had a lot of money to invest in the new game, as well as time. This new game was also the first game to feature a full megabyte of storage on its cartridge, as opposed to the standard 512 kilobytes that other SNES cartridges used at the time. Dropping the side-scrolling perspective seen in Adventure of Link, and going back to the top-down perspective seen in the original, the new game was finally released in Japan on November 21st, 1991, under the title Zelda no Densetsu Kamigami no Torai-Forsu, in North America on April 13th, 1992, and Europe on September 24th, 1992, under the title The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past has quite a few similarities to its predecessors, but is also very different at the same time. Being released to a more powerful console and the cartridge having more than double the storage of its predecessors combined, it is able to achieve a lot of things that the previous games just couldn't in a lot of different aspects. First off the bat is the opening cutscene, with which you are greeted after waiting on the title screen for a few seconds. In the last two games, due to the limitations of the hardware that they were produced on and the size of the games themselves, an opening cutscene was a bit too much to ask for, so they had to get creative and decided to go about laying out the basic narrative by info dumping. Well, that's all they could really do at the time, so we're not gonna judge them for that. This cutscene is very interesting, however. It's definitely interesting to see how the developers tried to expand on the game's universe this time around. In the last two games the plot was really simple, but with A Link to the Past, Nintendo clearly wanted to make the narrative of this franchise more interesting, so they decided to expand on the story a lot more than they did with Zelda 2. The more powerful system meant that the developers didn't have to rely on the manual as much this time around. This game still comes with a manual, which we will take a look at in a second, but I think it's just so interesting to look at this game and compare it to its predecessors and just go, okay, that's actually kinda cool. Anyways, the opening cutscene. Here we are told that a long time ago in Hyrule, legends told of an omnipotent and omniscient golden power that resided in a hidden land, which many people wished to obtain for themselves. Many people attempted to enter this hidden land in order to find the golden power, but none that entered it had ever returned. One day, a powerful evil force began to flow from this land of the golden power, so the king of Hyrule commanded 7 wise men to seal the gate to it. After many years had passed, and these events became myths obscured by the sands of time, an evil wizard named acclaimed had appeared and assassinated the king, declaring himself the new ruler. He sought out to release the seal to the Golden Land, and in order to do so, he started making the descendants of the 7 wise men vanish. I assume as some form of sacrifice? I mean, they aren't killed, they're just kinda teleported to another dimension and then stuck in a crystal of some sort, so I've got no idea if it's a sacrifice or not, but for the sake of drama, let's say that it is. The last one of the 7 girls being sacrificed is Princess Zelda, who is still alive, trapped in the dungeon of the Hyrule Castle. With this cutscene, your objective is made clear. Stop the evil wizard from doing whatever he's doing and rescue Zelda. A pretty effective first cutscene for the game. I would say the series, but I guess the ending sequences of Zelda 1 and 2 can be called cutscenes, so yeah. This already shows how much more powerful the system this game was made for is, as opposed to the previous ones, and watching this cutscene for the first time after playing both Zelda 1 and Adventure of Link brought such a smile to my face. Just from this preview, the game looks so much better than the first two and I love it. Alright then everyone, it's time to take a look at the manual and see how it compares to the ones from the previous entries. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of the manual this time around. I like the other two manuals, they had their own charm, but I'm a sucker for this 90s anime art style. I really like the way Zelda and Link are drawn here, as well as everything else pretty much. Anyways, the manual goes a bit more into detail when it comes to the story. Here we get our first glimpse at the gods of Hyrule, the 3 deities that created the land of Hyrule. Together, these beings created the land, science and magic, and of course, life and nature. After creating the world, the gods left Hyrule, leaving behind a gift, the Triforce. It is also said that the gods chose the Hylia as their people, and the Hylia could use psychic powers and wizardry thanks to their magic-infused blood. It's also mentioned here that they could hear messages from the gods thanks to their long ears, which... I mean, I guess that's one way of explaining why you made your main characters elves, but not elves at the same time. I don't know, I find it kinda funny. The Triforce wasn't just a gift left by the gods, however. Even though that in itself makes it a cool collectible, the real reason why one would want to seek the Triforce is the power it grants, a wish that stays true until the death of its user. One day, a gang of thieves skilled at the quote-unquote black arts managed to open the gate to the Golden Land. Also, this is something that definitely didn't happen, but I like to imagine that they were just punching a door standing in the middle of nowhere and that it just broke down after being punched for long enough. After getting to the Golden Land, the leader of these thieves got rid of his own followers and claimed the Triforce for himself. This man was none other than Ganondorf Dragmire, his pseudonym being Mandrag Ganon, meaning Ganon of the Enchanted Thieves. After this, you can guess what happened. Ganon turned the Golden Land into the Dark World, and the King of Hyrule ordered the 7 wise men to seal the gate to the Land of the Golden Power. There's a really cool detail that's mentioned here that I quite like. Quote, "The Triforce being an inanimate object cannot judge between good and evil. Therefore, it could not know that Ganon's wishes were evil, it merely granted them." I like this line essentially saying that the Triforce indeed does grant any wish to the user, no matter how good or evil they may be. The manual then states that, in order to combat Ganon, the people of Hyrule forged the Master Sword, which would be resistant to magic and could even reflect magical attacks created by someone using the Triforce. The 7 wise men searched for someone pure of heart and strong of body to take up the Master Sword, as that kind of person was the only one who would be able to wield it. However, they were unable to find someone like that, so they sealed the entrance to the Dark World altogether. Over the centuries, Hyrule managed to heal from the disaster that had occurred during the so-called Imprisoning War, but recently, Hyrule had been struck by pestilence and drought, seemingly out of nowhere, as the entrance to the Dark World was still closed. The King of Hyrule had offered rewards to anyone who would be able to find the source of these disasters that had been ravaging Hyrule. His call for help was answered when a wizard named acclaimed put a stop to these bales using some unknown form of magic. As a result, the king appointed acclaimed to the position of chief advisor and the heir to the 7 wise men. All seemed well until rumors began flooding around that acclaimed now rules the country, which has people in distress. From the opening cutscene, we can clearly tell that acclaimed is up to no good, as he can be seen harassing innocent women much like any semi-popular celebrity. Here we also get the prologue from the game in written form, with these very nice images. I'm a really big fan of Zelda and Link's designs here, especially Zelda. I think this redesign really suits her. Link's design here is mostly unchanged from Adventure of Link, but I don't know what it is about it, but I just kind of like it a little bit more, I guess. And that's pretty much it for the plot. The rest of the manual is mostly gameplay tips, how to play, what each screen does, etc. There's also a small bestiary at the end. It doesn't include every enemy from the game, which is a shame, but there's a few of the ones that appear in later dungeons, as well as some light world enemies. This art is very expressive as well. Overall, huge fan of this manual, it's really neat. Oh, and also, this prologue summary ends with the narrator saying that this is a new chapter in The Legend of Zelda. Man, I love it when they name drop it, it's always so funny to me for some reason. Another thing I find kind of interesting is how Link is never actually named anywhere in the manual. Maybe he is and I just missed it, but I find it really interesting. In the last 2 games, it was very clear that the protagonist's name is Link, but here I guess the developers really went with that whole putting yourself in the hero's shoes thing that I talked about in the Zelda 2 video. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, we're ready to finally talk about A Link to the Past. The game begins in Link's house, where he can be seen sleeping. He is immediately contacted by Zelda, who tells him that she is trapped inside of the castle dungeon and that she needs to be saved, as acclaimed is up to no good. Shocking, I know. Link then wakes up with his uncle telling him not to leave the house, and that he will take care of this. It turns out that this message from Zelda wasn't just some weird dream that Link dreamt, but an actual telepathic message, one that his uncle received as well. So of course, Link does what any person would do when their guardian tells them to do something. That's right, he disobeys his uncle's orders and immediately does what he just told him not to do. He goes out of the house, but not before grabbing a lantern from this chest over in the corner. It's raining outside, and Link makes his way towards the Hyrule Castle. He tries to enter the castle, but is turned away by a guard at the entrance. Zelda communicates with Link telepathically yet again, something that will seemingly be happening often in this game, telling him that there is a secret entrance to the castle from the outside. Link finds this entrance, falling into what I can assume is the sewer system of the castle, and finds his uncle lying on the floor. He approaches his uncle, who tells him that he didn't want him involved in this. He then tells him to take his sword and shield and that he can use the secret sword technique handed down by their people by focusing power in the blade. He He cheers him on, encouraging him to save Zelda, after which he seemingly passes away. From here, you fight through this tutorial area, which lets you get used to using the sword and seeing how strong it is overall. A thing that I really like about A Link to the Past is how, thanks to the newer, more powerful hardware, they could now make the sword have this sort of circular attack, rather than just being a straight poke seen in the NES titles. You can also use it much faster than you could in those games, giving you more protection from enemies. Another thing is that at most points in the game, most enemies take around the same amount of hits to kill, usually around 2 or 3, so since you'll be upgrading your sword a few times throughout your playthrough, you'll expect that enemies always take around the same amount of hits to get rid of, which I think is a nice touch. The 2 to 3 hits are also weak enough to never make you feel like you're way too powerful like a one-shot would, but it also almost never feels like the enemies are way too strong. There are some exceptions to this, of course, like some enemies take 2 or almost 3 times as many hits to kill, not counting the bosses, and there are some transitional moments between sword upgrades that will feel like you're a bit underpowered, like when going to the Dark World for the first time, for example. A lot of enemies here deal a lot more damage than you're used to, but that's kind of to be expected, since this is the quote-unquote harder part of the game, but it still threw me a bit off guard the first time I got here. Though, again, I feel the difficulty of this game is well adjusted when it comes to combat, something I had a lot of problems with Zelda 2, and even Zelda 1 to an extent. In Zelda 1 specifically, it often felt like you were being swarmed with enemies in the later dungeons, rather than them being necessarily harder to deal with by themselves, or requiring a lot of hits to kill. And when it comes to Zelda 2, yes commenters, I know that combat was the main focus in Adventure of Link, I played the game and finished it twice, but I just didn't find the combat super enjoyable. Though it is made to be a difficult game, and a lot of Zelda 2 fans mentioned that the combat always felt like a complete afterthought in A Link to the Past, but honestly, even if it was, I find it more fun and enjoyable than I did in Adventure of Link, since it's just not as frustrating for a casual player like myself. Anyways, back to the story. You then get through the first dungeon, that being Hyrule Castle, which has no boss. You get introduced to the concept of maps, items found in dungeons, and big keys. Link saves Zelda, and then the two of them go through a secret entrance to the sewers, then exit the sewers winding up in the sanctuary. The two of them meet up with the sage, and then Zelda and the sage tell Link that he must stop the evil wizard by any means necessary, as if he releases the seal to the land of the golden power, Hyrule will be brought to ruin. The sage also tells you of the legendary Master Sword, saying that one of the descendants of the 7 wise men may know where it is hidden. He marks the location of his house on Link's map, and tells him to go to speak to him. You then collect this chest, which gives you a heart container, permanently increasing your health by 1 heart, but more on those a bit later. From here, the game opens up. It stopped raining and you can explore the world and see what it has to offer. The game still asks you to go to Kakariko village to speak to the aforementioned descendant of the 7 wise men, but you don't have to go there immediately if you don't want to, though you will have to if you want to progress through the story. I suppose this is the time to talk about the music and the visuals. This game has a very recognizable art style that you've probably seen before. I like this art style. It feels like an evolution of the original with this chibi sort of aesthetic, which I'm a big fan of. Another thing that you might have noticed is that Link's hair is pink this time around. From what I've seen, and again I haven't seen much since I'm playing these games for the first time and in order, this is the only game where Link's hair is pink. I searched this up online. Some people say that the reason for this was an SNES limitation, while others claim that it's because they wanted Link's sprite to contrast better with the environment, which they would achieve by giving him pink hair, I guess. Though apparently the real reason is because when the Bunny Link sprite, which is used in the Dark World when Link transforms into a bunny, was created, its color palette was tied to regular Link's. And since Bunny Link is pink, Link's hair ended up being pink as well. And somehow no one managed to figure out the cause of this issue, so they just left it in the final game. The music is also pretty nice, and the soundtrack has more tracks this time around, about double of what the previous two had. Of course, that's to be expected, thanks to the more powerful system and the more storage. It's really interesting seeing how this game is essentially the first game, but kind of better in every way. A lot of the enemies from the first game are here, and you've also got the mountain, desert, forest regions, etc. It feels like an evolution of Zelda 1, though I suppose that's kind of what they were going for with it. Anyways, let's get on with the story. Once you get to Kakariko village, you can interact with the locals, most of which seem to be disturbed by your presence, since apparently the guards that patrol the various areas around Hyrule have had enough time to make wanted posters of you and place them everywhere around the village. Though this nice old lady still trusts us. Entering the village elder's house, you find out that he's not at home right now. His wife is here, and she tells you how he's been out and about for a while now, since acclaimed started harassing women to be exact. She then goes on about the Master Sword. She says that the Hylia forged the Master Sword long ago in order to fight those with evil hearts, and that it now sleeps inside the forest. She then tells you to look for someone in the village who may know where the village elder is, since apparently she has no idea. You can find this kid at the southmost point in the village. He's the village elder's grandson, and he's willing to help us find his grandfather by marking his location on the world map. Before you go there, you may want to check out the forest north of the village, since you've been told that the Master Sword sleeps somewhere inside the woods. The forest is covered in fog, but it's not that hard to see through it, and you can easily make your way through it. Along the path, you may encounter this guy who seems rather unfriendly. If he touches you, you will drop some of your collectibles, including bombs, arrows, and rupees. Speaking of which, they're all back in this game. Since we've moved back to the top-down perspective seen in Zelda 1, the items you collect no longer need to be passive. Of course, there are still some passive items, but most of them are active. I'll talk about them a bit more in depth later though. The fairies are also in this game. They function pretty much exactly the same as they did in Zelda 1. Around the map there are fairy ponds which you can interact with, after which this giant fairy will heal you to full health. There are also fairy fountains found throughout the game, featuring, you guessed it, fairies, which you can collect to restore 6 hearts, or trap them in a bottle to use for later. Some fairy ponds will also give you upgrades, like upgrading your shield or bomb and arrow capacity. You can also find the healing fairies randomly throughout the game, usually dropped by enemies. I digress. The Master Sword. You can find these fake swords throughout the forest, which, if you pick them up, you will get a prompt saying, "This is it, the Master Sword." No, it was too good to be true, which I find really funny. Going to the very top left of the map, you will find the Master Sword sleeping inside of a stone, with some gibberish written next to it. Attempting to pick it up will result in you not picking it up. It really was too good to be true. Oh, and also, the pickup mechanic. It's something that was introduced in this game. Link is able to pick up numerous items throughout the game, including bushes, pots, skulls, etc. You can throw these items at enemies, damaging them slightly or knocking them into pits, which is always really satisfying to do. When picking up items, you will also sometimes find collectibles such as hearts, bombs, arrows, and even buttons to push in order to open doors to progress through dungeons. You can also pull levers, which is cool. I think that pretty much covers the mechanics for now. We tried everything we could, but we're still kind of locked in, unable to explore the map fully, so let's head to where the village elder is apparently located. Getting to the village elder, he introduces himself as I can't pronounce his name, Sahasrahla, and he tells Link that the only way to obtain the Master Sword is to acquire the 3 pendants of virtue, those being the pendant of power, the pendant of wisdom, and the pendant of courage. He then asks you to acquire the pendant of courage from the Eastern Palace, and he'll give you an artifact to help you out on your journey. You go to the Eastern Palace, fight through it, and acquire the pendant of courage. I won't go too in depth about the first palace right now, as I will save that for later in the video. For now, my thoughts are, this is a really good introduction. Nothing too difficult so far, but it sets a great first impression for the game. Now that you've cleared the Eastern Palace, you go back to Sahasrahla, who is impressed by your feat. He decides to tell you more about the legend of the Master Sword. He says that an order of knights, known as the Knights of Hyrule, used to protect the royalty of the Hylia. These knights were also the guardians of the Pendant of Courage. However, most of them were killed in the imprisoning war mentioned in the manual of the game. Among their descendants, a hero must appear, that hero being Link. Sahasrahla implores Link to continue on his quest to obtain the Master Sword, and gives him the Pegasus shoes. These shoes are really fun to use. By holding down the A button, you charge up on the spot and then begin running very fast in the direction you were looking towards. You'll be using these to move around for the majority of the game, and they make moving around the world pretty fun, since they allow you to go super fast. If you run into something while using these, you will be knocked back, with the screen shaking for a second. This can be a bit annoying sometimes, but it's there for obvious reasons, so I don't mind it. Anyways, this charging mechanic is used to get the Book of Medora, which is required in order for you to progress through the game. The Book of Medora allows you to read the signs with gibberish written on them, just like the sign that we saw next to the Master Sword. From here you travel to the Desert Palace, where you pray like a true Christian that you are. How wholesome. The way forward opens, and you fight your way through the dungeon and acquire the Pendant of Power. Now, this is a very, and I mean a very minor nitpick that you're probably gonna roll your eyes over, but I seriously wish they made it so the Pendant of Power was located in the Tower of Hera in the north, and that the Pendant of Wisdom was located in the Desert Palace, since that's how they're arranged in the Triforce. Now, I'm very much aware that this order of the Triforce wasn't thought up back then, but still, it would have been so cool. From here you travel to the north through Death Mountain, my beloved. Nah, I'm just kidding. I know it's an iconic location at this point. Obviously they're going to bring it back for this game again. This time around I quite like it actually. It has boulders falling from the top of it, which can get quite hard to dodge sometimes, but you can also go through the caves and avoid all that trouble. On your way to the top you will also encounter this old man, who will give you the magical mirror, probably the most important item in this game, as it allows you to travel to the light world from the dark world. Now, you might be thinking it would allow you to travel from light world to dark world as well, but oh no, that's not the case. During your adventures through the light world, you will occasionally encounter portals to the dark world, which is the only way to access it. The first portal that you will encounter is this one on Death Mountain, which you have to step through in order to get to the Tower of Hera. Upon entering the dark world, you will transform into the aforementioned Bunny Link. This sprite in particular is very interesting. The two NPCs here called Bolly and Bolly's friend, very creative I know, will give you some more information on what you're supposed to do. Bolly will tell you that in order to go back to your original form, you need to obtain the Moon Pearl, which is found in the Tower of Hera. Bolly's friend's dialogue here is a lot more interesting, however. He says that the golden power, quote, changes your shape to reflect what's in your heart and mind, and that he's constantly changing his shape because his mind is always changing. I find the fact that Link transforms into a rabbit, that being what's in his heart and mind, very intriguing. Why a rabbit of all things? The rabbit represents many different things in many different cultures. It is often associated with good luck, the moon, and new beginnings. In pagan traditions, it symbolizes transformation, which could be a reason as to why the devs use the rabbit here. Though another interesting thing to note is that in many cultures and folklore, the rabbit represents fear, which I find the most interesting here. Fear. The exact opposite of courage, the trait that Link is most often associated with. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you think the reason for Link's Dark World form being a rabbit really is. Who knows, maybe I'm just unnecessarily overanalyzing this bit. Anyways, you then travel back to the Light World using your new best friend, the Magical Mirror. You enter the Tower of Hera and fight your way through it. You obtain the Moon Pearl, which now allows you to retain your true form in the Dark World, which is very essential as without the Moon Pearl, the game is unbeatable. After obtaining the Pendant of Wisdom, you exit the Tower of Hera and travel back to the forest near Kakariko village, where you once again search for the Master Sword. This time we can read the sign next to the Master Sword thanks to the Book of Medora, which says the following: the hero's triumph on Cataclysm's Eve wins 3 symbols of virtue. The Master Sword he will then retrieve, keeping the Knight's line true. We then get what is probably the coolest cutscene in the entire game, as Link lifts the Master Sword from its resting place, obtaining it. The Master Sword, and the 2 later upgrades that you can obtain at later points in the game, can fire a projectile when you're at full health that deals about half amount of damage that a normal sword strike does. I like the sound design of it. It's not too hard on the ears, and it makes it feel like it's a really powerful attack. Immediately after obtaining the Master Sword, Sahasrahla contacts Link telepathically, informing him that he will now be able to reflect the wizard's attacks, the wizard here being Agahnim. Damn, can every character in this game just telepathically communicate with Link? While going through the forest, Link gets another telepathic message from Zelda, who yells for help. Once you arrive at the sanctuary, the sage informs Link that he was just a second too late and that Zelda has been kidnapped. The sage then seemingly dies, or at least I assume that's what happens here, since he just kind of disappears. From here you have to go back to Hyrule Castle, clearing out this barrier with your newly acquired Master Sword and fighting your way through some arguably slightly tougher enemies, before you climb up the million, billion, trillion, quadrillion floors of this castle. Like, goddamn, this place is fucking big. Once you arrive at the top, you can see Agahnim once again harassing a woman, something that we've come to expect up until this point. Damn man, like, what's up with the Japanese and assaulting women being a central character trait? Anyways, Agahnim is super sadistic and he waited for Link to arrive just so he could watch Zelda get teleported to the Dark World. Then he moonwalks through the wall, I guess. Link follows him through it, fights him, kicks his ass cause the Master Sword is so strong, and then acclaimed teleports him to the Dark World. From here, the true objective of the game becomes apparent. In the Dark World, there are 7 palaces that you have to clear out, after each of which you free one of the girls that acclaimed trapped inside of the crystal. Well, I say free, but they're not actually released from them until you complete the game. I guess Link just kind of carries them around in his pocket throughout the journey. Anyways, I suppose this is the time to get into the palaces themselves. Counting the prologue and the Zelda rescue mission after obtaining the Master Sword, there are a total of 13 dungeons in this game. The Hyrule Castle during the prologue, the 3 Light World palaces, the Hyrule Castle again, the 7 palaces in the Dark World, and finally Ganon's Tower. That's a few more than the original, which had 9 dungeons, and almost double the Adventure of Link, which had 7. 13 dungeons might sound kind of intimidating, as that many levels, which usually last anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes depending on how far into the game you are, might make you think that the game seriously overstays its welcome. Personally, I think that maybe the dungeons being slightly shorter would have benefited the game more, since some of these can get really long, especially when they have more than 5 levels to them, which is rare, but it does happen. Ice Palace particularly was giving me quite a headache, as I couldn't figure out how to obtain the blue mail, the item found in this level, so I just completed the level without it and then went back into it, exploring it a lot more, trying to figure out how to get to this chest. The game features these cracked walls throughout its runtime, which indicate that a bomb can be placed to blow them up. However, not all cracked walls can be blown up, so you'll have to check if a wall is blowable by poking it with your sword, which, if it is, it will produce a unique sound. This same thing applies to cracked floors, but there's no way to check whether you can blow up a floor or not, other than using a bomb, of course. This isn't too big of a problem itself, but it's just that instances where cracked floors can't be blown up are a lot more common than cracked walls can't be blown up. And I mean, how am I supposed to know that this floor can't be blown up, but that this one can be? Maybe that's just me, but that resulted in me having no idea that I have to blow up this specific floor. Anyways, that's really a nitpick and just me being stupid. Exploration is really well done in this game, but I feel like some of the mechanics, such as the cracked floors, could have used a bit more fine-tuning. Maybe different sprites for the floors that can and can't be blown up. Some palaces can still be frustrating when it comes to the number of enemies in them, or their design. For example, Skullwoods gave me quite a headache when fighting through them. This is a really interesting dungeon, probably the most unique one in the entire game. Unlike all the other dungeons in the game, this one you complete non-linearly, with the dungeon having multiple entrances and exits, which I really like. Like I said, it's unique, but that doesn't necessarily make it good on its own. I think the dungeon itself is just fine, but it features these annoying hand enemies seen in the first The Legend of Zelda game, which this time, if they make contact with you, they will grab you and spawn you at the entrance that you last walked through, reloading the dungeon in the process. This can be useful to farm rupees, magic and hearts, I suppose, but over time it gets really annoying, because you'll be really close to the boss and then... oh well, I guess I'm back at the beginning, aren't I? This happened to me quite a few times on my first playthrough in this room where you're supposed to drag the statue onto this button to progress, but I just kept getting sent back to the start by the stupid hands. There's also points in the game where you'll have to run on a 2-tile wide collapsing passage, and there will usually be some enemy there which will knock you in the pit that you were trying to avoid, sending you back to the start of the room, forcing you to reload. This isn't too bad, but over time it can get kind of frustrating because you keep getting knocked into the stupid pit. It's also frustrating because these enemies aren't even that hard to avoid, it's just my need to fight everything I see that gets me sent back to the start of the room. Overall, these are mostly nitpicks. I think that overall the content in this game is really good. It's satisfying to clear out tons of enemies and it's almost never frustrating, since most enemies die pretty easily. I'd say there was a bigger focus on puzzles this time around though. In Zelda 1 the puzzles were relatively simple since the NES was much weaker than the SNES, and the game was much smaller than A Link to the Past. The puzzles here aren't that much deeper than in Zelda 1, but there are some neat new mechanics that are added, like the aforementioned blowing up cracked walls and floors, or these switch blocks that make barriers pop up or down, blocking or unblocking a passage. We've also got bumpers, which can knock you around, these star buttons that make parts of a room appear or disappear, and the stairs. At various points throughout the dungeons you will be able to walk up or down these staircases or sometimes ladders, which will make you appear on an upper or lower floor. This mechanic is dope as it allows for bigger dungeons seen in Zelda 2, as opposed to all dungeons being on the same level with some underground secret rooms that we saw in Zelda 1. There are also these parts where you have to light 4 candles in order to open doors. There's probably a few other mechanics that I'm forgetting, but all in all, a massive step up from the original, which I like a lot. Alright then, let's talk about items. There are a lot of them in this game, I would say about twice as much as in the original. Going over all of them in detail would make this video like 20 minutes longer than it is already, so I'll just focus on the new ones, since the items featured in Zelda 1 function pretty much exactly the same as in that game. So if you're interested in what they do, go watch my video on Zelda 1, or just play the game yourself. First up, we've got the hook shot. With this item you can cross large gaps by hooking yourself to an object to the other side. It doesn't let you hook onto walls though. Bit of a bummer, but understandable. Next up we got the magic powder. I didn't really use this one in my 2 playthroughs, but it does have its uses, as it allows you to obtain an upgrade that reduces your magic consumption by half, and you can also turn enemies into slimes with it. Next up we've got the fire and ice rods. These function in the same way, allowing you to fire a shot of fire or ice, setting an enemy on fire or freezing them respectively. I didn't use the ice rod almost at all in my runs, as the fire rod does basically the same thing, but that's just me. Next up we have the 3 medallions, Bombos, Ether and Quake. Ether and Quake are required to open the entrances to Misery Mire and Turtle Rock, while Bombos is just... well, not required to beat the game, but it is pretty dope, not gonna lie. Outside of opening palaces, they all have similar effects. Using Bombos will summon a fire attack, setting enemies on screen on fire. Ether will freeze enemies on screen, while Quake will turn them into slimes. All 3 will instantly destroy enemies on screen upon use most of the time. Again, like with the fire rod, I used Bombos the most, since it's the one I enjoyed using the most, and the other 2 basically have the same effects essentially. Next up is the lamp, which is called the lantern in the manual, which replaces the candle in this game, and it's used to light up candles around dark areas. That's basically it. Next up is the magic hammer, with which you can turn over these enemies, which reminded me of Spinies from the Super Mario franchise. It's also used to smash these thingies that block your path to certain sections of the map or dungeons sometimes. Then we've got one of my favorite items in any game ever, the Ocarina of Time, the flute. This item is quite interesting because obtaining it is, well, it's like playing a Yakuza sub-story, I guess. It begins by approaching this guy in the Dark World, at the spot where this big stump is located in the Light World, on which this guy is playing the Ocarina, before disappearing. The guy in the Dark World begs you to find his flute, after which he gives you a shovel. The flute is located in the top left corner of this area in the Light World. Once you dig it up and talk to the Dark World guy again, he says he can't use it anymore and that you should keep it, with his final wish being to hear the sound it makes one last time. After you play the Ocarina, he turns into a tree. Okay, but the sub-story doesn't end there, as you can travel to Kakariko village again to play the Ocarina in front of the weather pane, after which this absolutely magnificent sequence plays. This unlocks the duck, which you can summon by playing the Ocarina anywhere in the Light World. When you play it, the duck will fly in from the left of the screen. It will grab Link by his hand and lift him into the air. With the duck, you can now fast travel to 8 different locations in Hyrule. This is insanely cool, because first of all, it's fast travel, but second of all, they could have just designed some caravan or something that would transport you around, but no, it's a fucking duck that lifts you up in the sky like it's the Lord of the fucking Rings, and I love it. Anyways, after that we've got the bug catching net, which you can obtain by talking to this kid early in the game in Kakariko village. He says that he's too sick to go outside, so he borrows Link his net. Also, he's a Mario fan, guys, oh my god. With the net you can catch fairies and place them inside one of the 4 bottles that you can obtain throughout your playthrough. The bottles can also be filled up with the medicine of magic, which restores magic, the medicine of life, which restores health, and the medicine of... I forgot what it's called. Next is the Cane of Somaria, which allows you to spawn blocks and also platforms in Turtle Rock on these question mark spaces. Also, it'll fire out some projectiles when you recast it after placing a block. Next is the Cane of Birnia? Or is it Birna? Then we've got the Magic Cape, which allows you to roleplay as Harry Potter and makes you invisible, but also impervious to all attacks, and you can even pass through some objects like bumpers. I personally didn't use these two a lot, as they drain your magic a lot, but they definitely are useful. The last active item is the Magic Mirror, which just lets you travel from Dark World to Light World. We've also got some passive items, the aforementioned Pegasus shoes, which let you run quickly, the Power Glove and its upgrade Titan's Mitt, which let you pick up stones, and later on heavier stones, the Zora Flippers, which let you swim in deeper water, and the Moon Pearl, which lets you keep your original form in the Dark World. There is also the shield upgrades, the Fire Shield letting you block fireballs, and the Mirror Shield letting you block lasers. We've also got the two upgrades for the Master Sword, one being the Tempered Sword and the other being the Golden Sword. There are also the Silver Arrows, which are required to beat Ganon, akin to the first game. There are also the Blue and Red Mails, which function the same as the Blue and Red Rings from Zelda 1. Is there anything I'm forgetting? There's a lot of stuff in this game, guys, you'll have to excuse me. Alright, the heart containers and the heart pieces. Upon completing each dungeon, you will be rewarded with a heart container, which will permanently increase your health by 1 heart, up to a maximum of 20 this time around. There are also a bunch of heart pieces scattered all throughout Hyrule and Golden Land, and collecting 4 of these will assemble a heart container. Besides the heart containers, clearing dungeons in the Dark World will also reward you with a crystal containing a trapped girl inside of it, which will usually give you some exposition about the world these characters inhabit. I particularly like this one you get after clearing the Skullwoods. The princess here tells you about the prophecy of the Great Cataclysm. The prophecy states that if the Triforce is obtained by someone with a heart full of malice, a hero is destined to appear, and he must face the person who obtained the Triforce by himself. If the hero is defeated by the BBEG, then the world is doomed, as there is no one strong enough to defeat him. The hero could only be someone who had the blood of the Knights of Hyrule, who protected the royalty of Hylia. Link shares their blood, and so he must rescue Zelda without fail. Anyways, it's interesting how they already had this basic idea of the Royal Knights protecting the goddess Hylia already all the way back in 1991. Anyways, let's talk about the bosses. Each of the 13 dungeons mentioned previously, except for the Prologue Hyrule Castle, and I guess Ganon's Tower technically, will contain a boss, starting with the Armos Knights. This is a really cool fight. It's essentially 6 enemies bouncing around the room attacking you, each having their own health bar. They will also occasionally line up in the top part of the room and then move downwards, towards you. You might have seen something similar to this boss in the 2015 roguelike Enter the Gungeon, with its boss Kill Pillars, which is a reference to this boss. Basically, this boss is just here to test out your precision with the bow, and to show you that sometimes it's more effective to use it instead of your sword. Anyways, this is a pretty short fight, though a great first impression. The bosses in Zelda 2 were a major highlight of the game, and now in A Link to the Past, the very first boss is already very fun to go against. A very promising start so far. Next are the Land Molas. These are 3 snake-like enemies that bounce around the arena, coming out of the sand and then burrowing themselves once more. Striking their heads damages them, and they're pretty easy to deal with. Next is the Moldorm, which isn't particularly hard, but is really annoying. This is one of those bosses that you either beat on the first try, or it makes you eat shit for hours until you finally defeat him. That's an exaggeration for a comedic effect, don't take it too seriously. He's this giant worm enemy with big eyes that has a weak spot in the middle of his body. Doesn't sound too difficult to deal with, and well, it's not, but the thing is that his arena is surrounded by a bunch of pits, and he also knocks you back upon coming in contact with you. If he hits you into a pit, you fall on the floor below, making your ass have to walk all the way back up to his arena to fight him. It's not really that big of an issue, in fact you get the health refills in the room below his area, but it can get a bit annoying after a while, especially because he's not actually challenging or difficult in any way, just kind of drags on because of the pits. Also you can cheese him easily by standing in this corner. Then we've got the Hyrule Castle boss, Agahnim himself. This fight is pretty unique, as you can't damage him directly, and instead you have to reflect his attacks back at him. They often don't get reflected straight back at him though, and just wander off to the side, which can be a bit frustrating. Not too difficult though. Pretty cool fight honestly. Up next is the Helmasaur King, the first boss of the Dark World, and well, first of all, this guy has definitely seen some better days. And second of all, you beat him by either smashing his mask with the hammer or by throwing bombs at him. Pretty cool. He's pretty creepy too. Then we've got Argus, this big ass eye thing surrounded by clouds. You defeat him by hooking the clouds and attacking them. After you clear out all of them, he starts sliding around the arena and you have to damage him with your sword. Nothing too interesting, but I like the hooking thing. Then we've got Mothula, which I don't really get honestly. You're supposed to be able to hit him with a lot of things. Sword, arrows, fire rod, but for some reason, a lot of the time he just wasn't taking damage, even though I think I was hitting him. The fact that there's a bunch of spikes flying everywhere as well doesn't help much either. I think the cape would have come in real handy here, but I didn't remember to use it here. Whoopsie. Now here's a cool one. So back at the start of the game in Kakariko Village, there's this character that you can talk to who mentions the leader of the thieves in the forest called Blind the Thief. At the end of the level Thieves Town, you rescue one of the girls that Agahnim brought to the Dark World, except she's not trapped inside of a crystal. Very strange. If you bomb this opening with the light here and then bring the girl to the room below it, she transforms into Blind the Thief. He's cool, kinda similar to Helmet Head from Adventure of Link. He has two heads that will be flying around the room and shooting projectiles after you damage him enough. He dies pretty easily. Overall, it's an interesting fight, but when I was playing this game for the first time, I thought that Blind was legitimately one of the trapped girls, so I just walked out of the dungeon, and even though the girl says not to go this way, and even though Zelda tells you not to trust Blind's shape-shifting magic, I still went there. Anyways, if you were wondering if I'm stupid before, I guess this is your confirmation right here. Then we've got Cold Stare, and that's Cold with a KH, not a C. He stands there, menacingly looking at you, and you have to hit him with the Fire Rod or the Bombos Medallion in order to melt his shield. He then splits into 3 eyes that you have to defeat while there are ice cubes falling from the sky. He's good overall, died a few times here, probably because he didn't obtain the blue mail before this. Up next is Vitreous, this giant eye thing with a bunch of smaller eyes. Man, the devs really have an eye fetish or something. Once you clear out most of his eyes, he starts bouncing towards you, and you just have to hit him with your sword. The penultimate boss is Trinex, this 3-headed lizard, I think. You have to use the ice rod to stun one of his heads and then attack it, and use the fire rod for the other. After that, he pops out of his shell, which is when you can attack him directly. Phew, that was quite a lot. Man, I gotta say, I love how packed to the brim with content A Link to the Past is, but at the same time, there's so much stuff that it makes it so hard to talk about everything. I left out quite a bit from this review, because if I went into detail about everything, we would have been here for the next 2 hours, so yeah. I actually really wanted to talk about A Link to the Past's manga illustrated by Shotaro Ishinomori, but I'll save that for another video, because I'm already on page 23 of this script, and I've got no idea how long this video is gonna be, so yeah, no Zelda manga today, everyone. I'm terribly sorry to disappoint you. If there is enough demand for it, I'll probably cover it at some point. For now, I'll just give it a recommendation to go read it if you haven't already. And also, let me know if you'd be interested in me reviewing the Zelda CDI games, since someone in the comments actually asked me to do that once. Oh, and also the old 90s comics and the cartoon show. I would actually really like to do those. I was thinking about maybe doing it for April Fools or something. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And just like that, we've reached the finale of the game. It only took us like, what, 40 minutes? After you clear out Turtle Rock, you are presented with the final challenge the game has to offer. The Dark World counterpart to the Tower of Hera, that being Ganon's Tower. This level is huge. Shocking, I know. I feel like I should be expecting that for every game now, but still, it always catches me by surprise. This giant 8-floor dungeon contains a lot of tricky and difficult to navigate sections, as the dungeon requires you to poke around a lot in order to find out where you're supposed to go exactly. This is really cool because it incentivizes exploration, but at the same time it takes a very long time, which led to me wishing that the stage was a little less confusing and maybe just a little bit shorter, maybe like 1, maybe even 2 floors shorter. I know that it's supposed to be a tower and all, and hey, maybe that's just me, feel free to disagree. Anyways, throughout these floors you will encounter the bosses from the Light World again, ending with another fight with acclaimed, who will use some Shadow Jutsu technique this time around, spawning 2 clones that will also be targeting you. Once you defeat him, he will deflate and Ganon will come out of him. So it was the boar all along. I mean, you can see it coming from a mile away, but still, quite a reveal. He turns into a bat and flies out of the tower, after which Link summons his bird friend one final time, arriving at the entrance to the Pyramid of Power. Alright, I forgot to mention, you spawn here when acclaimed teleports you to the Dark World, yeah. Here you can choose to move around the world some more or immediately fight Ganon. The fight with Ganon is really neat, and a very cool final boss. He has a lot of phases and uses lots of different moves, including spinning his weapon around, spawning fire, clipping through the aether, standing still. About halfway through the fight, the floor tiles on the edges of the arena will disappear, and if you fall into them, well, sorry Baku, you gotta get your ass back up to the entrance to the Pyramid of Power and do the whole thing again. Once you get to his last phase, he uses some kind of dark magic that allows him to be impervious to all damage, unless you light these 2 candles on the sides of the arena. Normally, both candles will periodically go out and you will have to keep relighting them. Fortunately, there's some kind of bug that makes it so if you light one of the candles that's just going out for the first time, the bottom right candle will stay permanently lit, so you'll only have to keep relighting one in the bottom left. I actually really like this part of the fight, even if it gets tedious to keep relighting the candles. Something similar to this concept was present in Zelda 1, where Ganon will also go invisible, but there it just wasn't clear what exactly was happening, so I had no idea if the fight was on a timer or if he clipped out of reality or something. I guess that's just a hardware limitation, but still, I'm glad this part is executed so well in A Link to the Past. Striking Ganon while both of the lights are lit will cause him to become a brighter shade of blue, and here you have the opportunity of firing a silver arrow at him. Hitting him with 4 silver arrows will cause him to die. Link lifts the Master Sword skyward as the door behind him opens, revealing the Triforce. He touches it, making the wish to fix everything that Ganon ruined. The King of Hyrule is back, the bully and his friends come back to the Light World, Sahasrahla returns, your uncle recovers, and lots of other events happen all around Hyrule, with the final line of the game announcing that the Master Sword sleeps once more, this time forever. I'm sure that statement will not age poorly at all. And that concludes The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Now, to rank it in the tier list. I thought that this game as a whole was just incredible. I've thoroughly enjoyed it from top to bottom, with only some annoyances here and there. It's so amazing to see how much this game improved upon its predecessors in so many ways, and how well it holds up, even today. I think that for now I will be putting it in the incredible tier, but this is subject to change. Who knows, maybe at some point I will enjoy this game more or less compared to the others in the series when I revisit it, which will probably happen once we get to the 4 Swords video. This goes for all of the games, by the way, obviously. I don't know if I have to announce that, but I will. But for now, I found it very fun, and considering how so many people enjoyed it in their childhoods, it truly lives up to its name, being a real link to the past. Although, in the context of the game, I think the better title should have been, oh, I don't know, A Link Between Worlds? Oh well, at least the sequel got that title. If you've liked this video, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and maybe follow me on Twitter for updates on future videos, as well as some goofy things that I post there from time to time. My next video will be on The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening Deluxe, that being the Game Boy Color version, since the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color versions are basically the same game, except Deluxe is slightly better with more content. That concludes the video. My name is Chem, thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you next time.